Let me tell you something before we begin. Over the next hour, you may notice something unexpected happening. Not because you're about to learn a clever trick or a secret formula, but because you'll begin seeing yourself through a completely different lens. You'll finally understand why your thoughts seem crystal clear until the moment you try to speak them aloud. Why your voice sometimes trembles when the moment matters most. And, more importantly, why none of those experiences define who you are as a communicator. Many people never hear. The people who seem effortlessly confident when they speak, the ones who walk into a room and naturally capture everyone's attention, weren't born with a special gift. They learned, they practiced, they stumbled more times than anyone noticed. And little by little, they developed a skill that anyone, including you, can build. The difference is that they had to figure it out through years of trial and error. You don't have to. You're about to follow a roadmap that explains not only what great communicators do, but why it works. For most of our live-L fraction of our true communication ability, we replay conversations in our minds long after they're over. We spend hours preparing for an interview, only to lose our train of thought when it's finally our turn to speak. Sometimes we hear another person express the exact idea we wanted to say, and we quietly wonder why those words never came to us when we needed them. If any of that feels familiar, you're in the right place. Because communication isn't a talent reserved for a fortunate few. It's not something written into your DNA. It's a skill. Just like learning to cook, learning an instrument, or mastering any meaningful craft. And every skill can be improved when you understand the principles behind it and practice them consistently. The fact that you're here tells me some of you believes you can become better. Maybe you haven't fully trusted that belief yet, but it's there. And by the time we reach the end of this journey, you'll understand what's really happening inside your mind every time you speak. You'll learn how to quiet the voice that tells you you're not confident enough, not intelligent enough, or not worthy of being heard. You'll discover practical ways to speak with greater clarity, control your voice under pressure, understand the people you're talking to, navigate difficult conversations, and build genuine connections wherever life takes you. This isn't just a collection of theories. It's a step-by-step transformation in the way you communicate and ultimately the way you see yourself. So settle in, take a slow, deep breath, leave your doubts outside for a little while, and let's begin this journey together. Chapter 1. What's really happening inside your brain when you speak? Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're standing in front of your coworkers. Maybe you're about to present an idea during a meeting. Maybe your manager has just asked for your opinion. Only a few minutes ago, everything made perfect sense in your head. You had your points organized. You even knew exactly how you wanted to explain them. Then every pair of eyes turns toward you. Your heartbeat speeds up. Your palms begin to sweat. Suddenly, the words that felt so effortless only moments earlier seem to disappear. You start talking anyway. But the sentences come out tangled. Your thoughts feel scattered. Nothing sounds the way it did in your mind. When it's over, you replay every second of that moment, wishing you had said things differently. Does that sound familiar? For most people, it does. But here's something that often gets misunderstood. Those moments are rarely caused by a lack of intelligence. They aren't proof that your vocabulary is limited. And they certainly don't mean you're incapable of becoming a confident speaker. The real reason lies much deeper. In the way your brain responds when it believes you're under pressure. Prets a situation as threatening. Your nervous system reacts almost instantly. The surprising part is that your brain doesn't always distinguish between physical danger and social pressure. Standing in front of a large audience, presenting during an important meeting, answering a difficult question. To your brain, these situations can trigger a response remarkably similar to encountering real danger. Within seconds, stress hormones begin flooding your body. Cortisol, adrenaline. These chemicals are incredibly effective when your goal is survival. They sharpen your senses. They prepare your muscles to react. They help you escape immediate danger. But when your task is to organize complex thoughts and communicate clearly, they become your greatest obstacle. Instead of helping you think more clearly, they temporarily reduce your ability to access the very skills you need most. Your working memory, the mental space where ideas are organized into words, starts shrinking. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to prepare an elaborate dinner, not on a spacious kitchen counter, but on a tiny cutting board no larger than a postcard. The ingredients haven't disappeared. Your cooking ability hasn't vanished. There's simply no room to work effectively. That's exactly what happens inside your brain. Your knowledge is still there. Your ideas are still there. But the workspace needed to connect those ideas into clear sentences has suddenly become much smaller. That's why your vocabulary seems to disappear. Why simple explanations suddenly become difficult. Why your thoughts feel scattered even though you know exactly what you're talking about. Many people leave moments like these believing they're simply bad at speaking. The truth is far more encouraging. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's protecting you. The problem isn't your intelligence. The problem is that your brain has mistaken communication for danger. Now here's the part NG. Confident speakers experience these same biological reactions. Their hearts race, their breathing changes, their palms sweat. They aren't fearless. The difference is that they've trained themselves to interpret those sensations differently. Picture two surfers watching the exact same wave. One is inexperienced. The moment the wave approaches, panic takes over. All they see is danger. The other surfer smiles. They see opportunity. The wave hasn't changed. Only the interpretation has. Communication works the same way. Pressure is inevitable. The question isn't whether you'll feel it. The question is what meaning you'll assign to it. If your mind labels those physical sensations as evidence that you're about to fail, your performance will almost certainly suffer. But if you learn to recognize those same sensations as your body preparing to perform, that energy becomes something you can work with instead of something you fear. The wave doesn't disappear. You simply learn how to ride it. There's another fascinating truth about rain. It doesn't process every conversation the same way. Instead, it operates through 3 distinct levels of communication. Understanding these levels is like finally discovering the instruction manual for something you've been using your entire life without fully understanding. The first level is reactive processing. This is your brain's default mode. Someone asks a question, and you answer almost immediately. Whatever thought appears first comes out first. There's very little reflection, very little planning. It's fast, automatic. And for everyday conversations, that's perfectly fine. Chatting with friends, talking about your weekend, ordering coffee. These situations don't demand much mental effort. But when the conversation actually matters, reactive thinking often isn't enough. That's where the second level begins. Intentional processing. Instead of speaking immediately, you create a brief pause, just enough time to organize your thoughts. You begin selecting your words with purpose. You consider how your message will sound before you say it. You edit your ideas in real time. Yes, it requires more concentration, but the quality of your communication improves dramatically. You're no longer reacting. You're communicating with intention. Then comes the highest level, strategic processing. This is where exceptional communicators spend most of their time. At this stage, your attention expands far beyond your own words. You're aware of your message. You're observing how your audience is responding, and you're thinking about where you want the conversation to go next. You're not simply exchanging information anymore. You're shaping an experience. That might sound manipulative at first, but it isn't. True strategic communication isn't about controlling people. It's about understanding them well enough that your message reaches them exactly as you intended. That's not manipulation. It's respect for your ideas and for the people listening. Tumbling the voice inside your head. Before a single word ever leaves your mouth, another conversation has already begun. It isn't happening with your audience. It isn't happening with the people around you. It's happening inside your own mind. There's a quiet voice that follows you everywhere. It comments on every challenge, judges every mistake, predicts every outcome, and often speaks long before you have the chance to speak for yourself. For many people, that voice isn't encouraging. It's critical. It whispers doubts at exactly the moments confidence is needed most. Even now, as you listen to these ideas, that inner dialogue is probably active. Perhaps it's saying, this actually makes sense. Maybe I can become a better communicator. Or maybe it's saying something completely different. This sounds good, but it won't work for me. I've always been like this. Some people are just naturally confident. I'm not one of them. Whatever your inner voice is saying right now, I want you to understand one important truth. It isn't speaking facts. It's repeating a story. And stories, no matter how long you've believed them, can always be rewritten. Think about the exact same job interview. They've studied, they've practiced, they have similar experience. Yet the conversation happening inside each of their minds couldn't be more different. The first person thinks, I'm going to freeze. They're going to realize I'm not good enough. The moment I make one mistake, everything will fall apart. The second person hears something very different. I've prepared for this. I have valuable experience to share. Let's see how I can help them understand what I bring. Same interview, same questions, same opportunity, but two completely different mental worlds. And those inner conversations don't stay trapped inside the mind. They shape everything that follows. They influence posture. They change breathing. They affect eye contact. They alter vocal tone. They even determine which words become easiest to access. What begins as a private thought gradually becomes a public performance. That's why two people with similar knowledge can leave the room creating completely different impressions. The conversation inside always influences the conversation outside. Think of it as a waterfall. Every that thought creates an emotion. The emotion changes your body. Your body changes the way you speak, and the way you speak shapes the outcome of the interaction. Finally, that outcome reinforces the original thought. It's a cycle that repeats itself again and again. If the first thought is rooted in fear, the entire chain tends to move in the same direction. But if you can change the beginning of that sequence, everything that follows begins changing with it. That's why becoming a better communicator isn't only about learning new techniques. It's also about transforming the conversation you have with yourself before anyone else ever hears your voice. Now, I'd like you to consider something with compassion. Your inner critic didn't appear out of nowhere. At some point in your life, it learned its lines. Maybe it began in a classroom. You answered a question incorrectly, and laughter echoed around the room. Maybe someone corrected you so harshly that speaking up started feeling dangerous. Maybe a parent believed criticism would help you improve, but instead it quietly convinced you that mistakes weren't allowed. Or perhaps classmates mocked the way you pronounced a word, and that brief moment stayed with you far longer than anyone else remembered it. Experiences like these rarely disappear on their own. Instead, they leave behind mental pathways that your brain returns to automatically whenever a situation feels similar. Every presentation, every interview, every important conversation, your brain quietly says, we've been here before. Be careful. Don't make the same mistake again. It isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. The problem is that it's protecting you from a danger that no longer exists. Fortunately, your brain is far more adaptable than most people realize. It's constantly changing. Imagine a river flowing through the landscape. Over time, the water naturally creates familiar channels. Eventually, those channels become the easiest path for every future stream. Your thoughts work much the same way. The more often you think something, the easier it becomes to think it again. But rivers can be redirected, new channels can be created, and your brain works exactly the same way. This remarkable ability is known as neuroplasticity. It allows your brain to form new connections throughout your entire life. Not only when you're young, not only under perfect circumstances, right now. Every time you consciously replace an old limiting belief with a healthier one, you're beginning to carve a new mental pathway. It may feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, but repetition slowly transforms the unfamiliar into the natural. Little by little, your new thoughts become your default thoughts, and eventually, your inner voice begins telling a completely different story. Chapter 2. Taming the Voice Inside Your Head, continued. There's a common misconception that confident people simply don't experience negative thoughts. But that's rarely true. The difference isn't that they never hear an inner critic. The difference is that they've stopped treating it as the absolute truth. Imagine sitting in a cafe beside a busy street. Cars pass by, people talk, music plays somewhere in the distance. You notice those sounds, but you don't chase every one of them. Your thoughts can be approached in exactly the same way. A thought appears. I'm going to embarrass myself. Instead of immediately believing it, you simply notice it. You recognize its presence without allowing it to take control. This small shift creates something incredibly valuable. Space. The space between a thought and your response. And inside that space lies your freedom to choose a different direction. Mistakes to make is confusing thoughts with facts. Suppose you're invited to give a presentation next week. The first idea that enters your mind might be, everyone is going to think I'm incompetent. Pause for a moment. Is that a fact? Or is it simply a prediction? Most of the time, it's nothing more than a story your brain has created based on previous experiences. Yet because that story feels emotional, it also feels true. Our minds are remarkably convincing storytellers. They can transform possibilities into certainties before a single event has even taken place. That's why learning to question your thoughts is so powerful. Not every thought deserves your trust. Some deserve your curiosity instead. Ask yourself, what evidence actually supports this? Is there another explanation? Would I say these same words to someone I care about? Questions like these interrupt the automatic cycle of self-criticism. Instead of accepting every thought as reality, you begin examining it. And the moment you examine it, its power begins to weaken. Another habit and its confidence is changing the language you use with yourself. Notice the difference between these two statements. I'm terrible at public speaking. Now compare it with, I'm still learning to become a better public speaker. At first glance, they may seem similar, but psychologically, they lead your brain in completely different directions. The first statement closes the door. It defines your identity. The second leaves room for growth. It reminds you that ability isn't fixed. It's developing. That single word, learning, changes everything. Because if you're learning, then mistakes are no longer proof that you've failed. They're simply part of the process. The same principle applies to countless areas of life. Children don't assume they'll never walk after falling hundreds of times. Musicians don't expect perfection during their first lesson. Athletes don't quit because they struggled during practice. Progress has always required repetition. Communication is no different. Every conversation becomes another opportunity to improve rather than another opportunity to judge yourself. Something else worth recognizing is often borrows the language of certainty. It says, you always mess this up. You never know what to say. Everyone noticed your mistake. Pay attention to those words. Always. Never. Everyone. No one. They're rarely accurate. Our minds naturally exaggerate when emotions are involved. One awkward conversation suddenly becomes, I always embarrass myself. One forgotten sentence becomes, I'm terrible at speaking. One uncomfortable meeting becomes, everyone thinks I'm incompetent. The reality is usually far more balanced. Some conversations go well, others don't. Some people connect with your message, others may not. That's simply part of being human. Replacing absolute thinking with balanced thinking immediately reduces unnecessary pressure. You stop expecting perfection, and instead, you begin expecting progress. There's also something incredibly important to remember, F. Confidence doesn't appear first. Action does. Many people wait until they feel confident before speaking up. Unfortunately, that moment rarely arrives. Confidence is usually the result of experience, not the prerequisite for it. Think about riding a bicycle. Very few people feel confident before climbing onto one for the first time. Confidence arrives after countless small successes. Communication follows the exact same pattern. Each conversation teaches your brain, I survived. That wasn't as bad as I imagined. I handled that better than last time. Gradually, those experiences begin replacing the old story your inner critic has been repeating for years. Not overnight, but consistently. That's how genuine confidence is built. One conversation at a time. Finally, remember this. Your inner voice will probably never disappear completely. Okay, the goal isn't silence. The goal is leadership. Instead of allowing that voice to control your decisions, you learn to lead despite it. You acknowledge the fear, you hear the doubt, but you choose your actions based on your values rather than your anxiety. That's what courageous communication really looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to speak anyway. Because every time you do, you teach your brain a new lesson. Not that communication is dangerous, but that it's safe. And every repetition makes that lesson stronger than the one before. Little by little, the voice that once held you back begins losing its authority. In its place grows a quieter, steadier voice, one that reminds you of something you've perhaps forgotten for a long time. You have something worth saying, and the world can only hear it if you're willing to let yourself speak. Chapter 3. Your body is always talking. Before you speak a single word, you've already said something. Not with your voice, not with carefully chosen sentences, but with your posture. The way you walk into a room, the way your shoulders rest, the direction of your gaze, even the rhythm of your breathing. Long before people consciously evaluate what you're saying, their brains are already forming quiet impressions about how you feel and whether they should trust you. This isn't because people are judgmental. It's because the human brain has always relied on nonverbal signals to understand the world. For thousands of years, long before language became as sophisticated as it is today, our ancestors survived by reading body language. A tense posture could signal danger. Relaxed movement suggested safety. A genuine smile encouraged connection. A fearful expression warned others to stay alert. Although the modern world looks very different, your brain still works in much the same way. Every conversation begins with observation. Only afterward do words begin to matter. Think about the last time you met someone for the very first time. Before they introduced themselves. Before they explained what they did for a living. You probably had an impression already. Maybe they appeared calm. Maybe they seemed approachable. Perhaps they looked confident. Or maybe something felt slightly uncomfortable, even though you couldn't explain why. Those first impressions are rarely built from words. They're built from countless tiny signals your brain processes automatically. Most of these judgments happen so quickly that we're completely unaware they're taking place. And the remarkable thing is this: other people are doing exactly the same thing when they meet you. This is why communication can sometimes feel confusing. You may have prepared the perfect explanation. You may have chosen your words carefully. Yet if your body is communicating something completely different, your audience experiences two conflicting messages at the same time. Imagine someone saying, "I'm really excited to be here," but they avoid eye contact. Their shoulders collapse inward. Their voice barely rises above a whisper. Their hands fidget constantly. Which message will people believe? Usually not the words. They'll believe what the body is communicating. Not because they're ignoring the language, but because consistency creates trust. When words and body language support each other, communication feels authentic. When they contradict each other, uncertainty quietly appears. One of the most powerful examples of this is posture. Notice what happens when someone feels defeated. Their shoulders naturally roll forward. Their head lowers. Their breathing becomes shallow. Their movements become smaller. Now picture someone who feels genuinely confident. They don't necessarily make themselves look bigger. Instead, they appear balanced, relaxed, grounded. Their posture allows them to breathe naturally. Their movements feel intentional rather than rushed. The important lesson here isn't to imitate confidence like an actor performing on stage. People usually recognize forced confidence almost immediately. Instead, it's about removing unnecessary tension that prevents your natural confidence from showing. Your body already knows how to move comfortably. Stress simply interrupts it. Breathing plays an equally important role. When anxiety appears, breathing often becomes quick and shallow. Without realizing it, your body begins preparing for action rather than conversation. Unfortunately, this creates a chain reaction. Shallow breathing increases physical tension. That tension affects your voice. Your voice influences your confidence, and your confidence shapes the entire interaction. Something as simple as slowing your breathing before an important conversation can interrupt that cycle. Not because slow breathing magically removes fear, but because it reminds your nervous system that you're safe. Once your body feels safe, your mind begins working more clearly as well. Eye contact is another signal people often misunderstand. Some believe confidence means staring directly into another person's eyes without looking away. In reality, genuine eye contact feels natural rather than forced. It comes and goes throughout a conversation. It creates connection without becoming uncomfortable. People aren't looking for perfection, they're looking for presence. When someone feels truly engaged, their attention naturally stays with the person in front of them. Not because they've memorized a communication technique, but because they're genuinely interested. Ironically, the easiest way to improve eye contact is often to stop thinking about yourself. The more curious you become about the other person, the less energy you spend worrying about how you're being perceived. And that simple shift changes everything. Your hands tell stories too. Many people become painfully aware of them during presentations. What should I do with my hands? The question itself usually creates the problem. When we become overly self-conscious, our movements lose their natural rhythm. Some people hide their hands completely. Others grip objects tightly. Some begin repeating the same gesture over and over again. The goal isn't to memorize specific hand movements. It's to allow your gestures to support your message naturally. When your words describe something expanding, your hands may open. When you compare two ideas, your hands may separate. When you emphasize an important point, a simple movement can reinforce it. Natural gestures don't distract. They help people understand. Perhaps the most important principle of all is this: your body doesn't simply communicate your emotional state. It also influences it. Many people assume emotions always come first and physical behavior follows, but the relationship works in both directions. When you deliberately reduce physical tension, when you stand in a balanced position, when you breathe deeply, when your movements become calmer, your brain receives new information about your internal state. Little by little, your body begins telling your mind, "We're okay. This situation isn't dangerous." You can stay present. Confidence doesn't suddenly appear in one dramatic moment. It grows through hundreds of small signals that gradually teach your nervous system a new reality. As you move through your next conversations, don't focus on appearing impressive. Focus on being present. Notice your breathing. Relax unnecessary tension. Keep your attention on the person in front of you rather than on your own performance. Because people rarely remember perfect words. They remember how someone made them feel. And often, that feeling begins long before the first sentence is ever spoken. Chapter 4: The Secret to Truly Listening. Most people believe communication begins when they start talking. In reality, the strongest communicators begin somewhere else. They begin by listening, not simply waiting for their turn to respond, not quietly rehearsing what they want to say next, but listening with the intention of understanding another human being. It sounds simple, yet it's one of the rarest skills in modern life. In a world filled with constant notifications, endless distractions, and conversations that move faster every year, genuine attention has become surprisingly uncommon. And because it's uncommon, it has become incredibly valuable. Think about the last conversation that made you feel genuinely understood. Chances are, it wasn't because the other person offered perfect advice. It wasn't because they had all the answers. It was because, for a few moments, you felt completely heard. They weren't checking their phone. They weren't interrupting every sentence. They weren't trying to steer the conversation back toward themselves. They simply stayed with you. That experience creates something powerful: trust. People naturally open up when they feel safe. And they feel safe when they sense they're being listened to without judgment. Many conversations fail because both people are trying to be understood at the same time. One person speaks, the other appears to listen, but internally, they're already preparing a response. They're searching for a clever story, a stronger opinion, a better example. By the time the first speaker finishes, half the message has already been missed. Listening isn't silent waiting. It's active attention. It asks questions. It notices emotions hiding beneath words. It recognizes what someone means, not only what they say. Sometimes a person says, "I'm fine," yet their voice feels unusually quiet. Their shoulders seem heavy. Their smile disappears almost as quickly as it appears. A careful listener notices those details, not to judge them, but to understand them more completely. Curiosity is one of the greatest gifts you can bring into a conversation. When you're genuinely curious about another person, something remarkable happens. The pressure to perform begins to disappear. Instead of wondering, do I sound intelligent? You begin wondering, what can I learn from this person? That single shift changes the energy of the conversation. People feel your attention. They become more relaxed. And surprisingly, you often become more articulate as well. Why? Because your focus has moved away from self-consciousness. Your mind is no longer trapped inside itself. It's engaged with someone else. Exceptional listeners also understand the value of silence. Many people rush to fill every pause. A few seconds of quiet can feel uncomfortable, so they speak, they explain, they interrupt the natural rhythm of reflection. But silence isn't always empty. Sometimes silence is where the most meaningful thoughts are being formed. Give someone a few extra moments after they finish speaking. Often they'll continue. And what comes next is frequently the part they truly wanted to say. Patience creates depth. Rushing creates surface-level conversation. Another habit that transforms communication is learning to reflect rather than immediately react. Imagine a friend says, "I've been overwhelmed lately." A common response might be, "You should take a vacation." The advice may be well-intentioned, but perhaps that's not what they need. Instead, you might respond, "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot by yourself." Notice the difference. The second response doesn't solve the problem. It acknowledges the experience. People often don't need immediate solutions. They need someone willing to stand beside them long enough to understand the problem first. Only then does advice become meaningful. Listening also means paying attention to what remains unsaid. Every conversation contains two layers: the words themselves and the emotions underneath them. A coworker might complain about a project, but underneath the complaint may be disappointment, or exhaustion, or fear of failing. A family member may seem angry, yet beneath that anger could be loneliness or hurt. The better you become at recognizing emotional meaning, the more naturally your conversations deepen. You stop responding only to sentences. You begin responding to people. One mistake many communicators make is believing they must always have something impressive to contribute. In reality, thoughtful questions often create more meaningful conversations than impressive answers. Questions invite people to think. They encourage reflection. They communicate respect. Instead of proving how much you know, you demonstrate how much you care. Simple questions can completely transform a discussion. What was that experience like for you? What made you feel that way? What happened after that? These aren't complicated questions, but they tell the other person, "I'm interested." And genuine interest is difficult to fake. Listening is also an act of humility. It requires accepting that your perspective isn't the only one that matters. Every person you meet has lived a life you haven't lived. They've experienced struggles you've never faced. They've learned lessons you'll never discover unless you're willing to hear them. Approach each conversation with the belief that there's something worth learning. Even if you disagree, even if your experiences are completely different. Respect doesn't require agreement. It requires openness. As you practice becoming a better listener, you'll notice an unexpected change. Your own speaking begins to improve. Because the best communicators aren't simply skilled at expressing ideas, they're skilled at understanding people. And once you truly understand the person in front of you, choosing the right words becomes much easier. Communication stops feeling like a performance. It becomes a shared experience, a partnership built on attention, curiosity, and respect. In the end, people rarely remember the longest speech. They remember the person who made them feel heard. And sometimes, that is the most powerful message you'll ever communicate. Chapter 5. Speaking with clarity and confidence. There is a common belief that clear speakers are simply gifted with words, that they naturally know exactly what to say, that confidence flows effortlessly from one sentence to the next. But if you observe exceptional communicators closely, you'll notice something different. They aren't trying to sound impressive. They're trying to be understood. And that single intention changes everything. The goal of communication isn't to prove how intelligent you are. It's to help another person see an idea as clearly as you see it. The moment your focus shifts from impressing people to serving them, speaking becomes far less intimidating. Think about the teachers you've remembered throughout your life. The ones who explained difficult ideas so clearly that they suddenly felt simple. They didn't rely on complicated language. They didn't use long, impressive words every chance they had. Instead, they built understanding one idea at a time. They started with something familiar. Then they gently introduced something new. Great communicators do the same. They don't overwhelm people with information. They guide them, one step after another. Many people make the mistake of believing that speaking faster makes them sound more knowledgeable. In reality, the opposite is often true. When we rush, our thoughts begin competing with one another. Ideas become tangled. Important points disappear beneath unnecessary words. Listeners have less time to absorb what we're saying. And ironically, the speaker begins feeling even more anxious because they're trying to keep up with their own pace. Slowing down isn't a sign of uncertainty. It's a sign of control. A calm pace gives your audience time to think. It gives your own mind time to organize the next idea, and it allows important moments to carry the weight they deserve. Another habit of clear communicators is simplicity. Imagine trying to explain a beautiful landscape. You could describe every single tree, every blade of grass, every cloud in the sky. Or you could paint the larger picture first. People understand complexity much more easily when they first understand the foundation. Before adding details, establish the main idea. Once people know where you're taking them, they'll naturally follow the rest of the journey. Clarity isn't about saying more. It's about making every sentence easier to follow. Confidence also grows when your message has structure. Without structure, thoughts often arrive in random order. You remember one point, then another, then suddenly realize you've skipped something important. The conversation begins feeling scattered. But when your ideas follow a clear path, both you and your audience feel more relaxed. A simple beginning, a meaningful middle, a memorable ending. This rhythm appears in great speeches, powerful stories, and meaningful conversations alike. People aren't only listening to individual sentences, they're following a journey. Help them see where they're going. Transitions are often overlooked, yet they quietly hold communication together. Imagine reading a book with every chapter disconnected from the one before it. The ideas might all be valuable, but the experience would feel confusing. Conversations work the same way. Small transition phrases create flow. There's another reason this matters. Let's look at this from a different perspective. Now consider what happens when. These gentle bridges guide the listener naturally from one idea to the next. Instead of feeling abrupt, your message begins to feel effortless. Your voice also carries meaning beyond the words themselves. A steady voice communicates calm. A varied voice communicates energy. A thoughtful pause communicates confidence. Many people fear silence during conversation. They rush to fill every empty space. But silence is not your enemy. A well-placed pause allows an important idea to settle. It gives listeners a moment to reflect, and it reminds everyone in the room that you're comfortable enough not to rush. Sometimes what you don't say immediately is just as powerful as the words that follow. One of the most effective ways to become more articulate is surprisingly simple. Finish one thought before beginning another. Our minds often move faster than our mouths. Halfway through explaining one idea, we remember something else, then another. Soon we've started 3 different thoughts without completing any of them. Listeners aren't confused because the ideas are difficult. They're confused because the path keeps changing. Discipline yourself to complete one idea completely. Only then move forward. Clear thinking naturally creates clear speaking. Mistakes will still happen. You'll occasionally forget a word, lose your train of thought, mispronounce something. That doesn't make the conversation a failure. People rarely remember small imperfections. They remember authenticity. Most listeners aren't searching for reasons to criticize you. They're trying to understand you. And when they see someone remain calm after making a small mistake, trust often grows rather than disappears. Perfection creates distance. Humanity creates connection. Perhaps the greatest secret of confident communication is this: stop trying to sound perfect. Instead, try to be helpful. When your purpose becomes helping another person understand, your attention shifts away from fear, away from self-consciousness, away from the endless question, how am I doing? And toward a far more meaningful one, How can I make this clearer? That question transforms everything because communication has never been about performing. It has always been about connecting. Every conversation is an opportunity to leave someone with greater understanding than they had before. If you can do that consistently, your confidence won't be something you force. It will become a natural reflection of the value you're creating for others. By the end of this chapter, remember one simple principle. People don't admire speakers because they use the most complicated vocabulary. They admire those who make complicated ideas feel simple. Speak with intention. Move at a pace that allows understanding. Organize your thoughts before rushing into words, and trust that clarity will always leave a stronger impression than complexity. Because in the end, the most powerful communicators aren't remembered for how impressive they sounded. They're remembered because everyone understood exactly what they meant. Chapter 6: Building Genuine Connections Through Conversation. Every conversation leaves something behind. Sometimes it's information, sometimes it's an emotion, and sometimes, without either person realizing it, it's the beginning of trust. Many people assume that meaningful conversations are built through perfect words or unforgettable stories. While those things can help, they are rarely the foundation of genuine connection. People don't connect because someone sounded flawless. They connect because someone felt real. Think about the people you naturally enjoy spending time with. They probably aren't constantly trying to impress you. They don't seem to measure every sentence before speaking. They don't compete for attention in every discussion. Instead, being around them feels comfortable. You feel free to speak, free to laugh, free to disagree, free to be yourself. That sense of comfort doesn't happen by accident. It grows from emotional safety. When people believe they won't be judged, interrupted, or dismissed, they begin revealing parts of themselves they normally keep hidden. And that's where real relationships begin. One of the greatest obstacles to connection is the desire to be liked. It sounds strange at first. After all, isn't communication supposed to help people like us? The problem is that when pleasing others becomes our primary goal, authenticity quietly disappears. We start agreeing with opinions we don't truly share. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We avoid expressing ideas that might create disagreement. Little by little, we trade honesty for approval. Ironically, this often produces the opposite effect. People may enjoy the conversation, but they never feel like they've actually met the real person behind the words. Connection requires sincerity, not perfection. This doesn't mean speaking every thought that enters your mind. Honesty without kindness can become cruelty. Kindness without honesty becomes performance. Healthy communication lives somewhere between the two. It allows you to express yourself respectfully while remaining true to your values. When people know your words are genuine, even difficult conversations become easier to trust. Consistency builds credibility. If your actions repeatedly match your words, people stop wondering whether they can rely on you. They simply know they can. Empathy is another essential part of meaningful conversation. Empathy isn't agreeing with everything another person says. It's making the effort to understand how the world looks from where they're standing. Two people can experience the same event and remember it completely differently. Neither perspective is necessarily wrong. They're simply shaped by different experiences, beliefs, and emotions. Approaching conversations with curiosity instead of certainty creates space for understanding. Rather than asking, "How can I prove I'm right?" try asking, "What might this person be seeing that I haven't noticed?" That question has the power to transform disagreement into dialogue. Another important habit is learning to make people feel valued. Everyone wants to believe their presence matters, that their thoughts deserve attention, that their experiences have meaning. You don't accomplish this through grand gestures. You accomplish it through small moments of genuine attention. Remembering someone's name, following up on something they shared last week, celebrating a success that mattered to them, asking about something they cared deeply about. These moments may seem insignificant, yet together they quietly communicate one powerful message: you matter. And very few messages create stronger relationships than that. Vulnerability also plays a surprising role in connection. Many people believe confidence means never revealing uncertainty, never admitting mistakes, never allowing others to see weakness. In reality, carefully chosen vulnerability often strengthens trust. Imagine listening to two speakers. One presents themselves as flawless. Every decision was correct. Every challenge was easily overcome. The other openly acknowledges moments of failure, doubt, and growth. Which one feels more human? Which one feels easier to relate to? People don't connect with perfection. They connect with honesty. Your struggles, when shared appropriately, remind others that they're not alone in theirs. Conflict is another inevitable part of communication. No matter how skilled you become, there will always be disagreements. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict. The goal is to navigate it without damaging the relationship. That begins by separating the problem from the person. Disagree with ideas without attacking character. Challenge opinions without questioning someone's worth. It's possible to remain respectful while standing firmly behind your beliefs. In fact, respectful disagreement often strengthens relationships because it demonstrates maturity and mutual respect. People don't need you to agree with everything they say. They need to know they'll still be respected when opinions differ. Gratitude is one of the simplest ways to deepen connection, yet it's often overlooked. People rarely hear sincere appreciation. Not because others don't feel grateful, but because they assume gratitude is already understood. Don't assume. Say it. Tell someone you appreciated their help. Acknowledge their effort. Recognize their kindness. Small expressions of gratitude create lasting emotional memories. People may forget specific conversations. They rarely forget how appreciation made them feel. Perhaps the greatest lesson about connection is this: stop trying to win conversations. Start trying to understand people. Conversations aren't competitions, they're opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to encourage, to comfort, to challenge thoughtfully, to grow together. Every meaningful relationship is built one conversation at a time, not through dramatic moments, but through hundreds of ordinary interactions filled with honesty, respect, and genuine attention. As you leave this chapter, remember that communication is never only about exchanging words. It's about building bridges between lives. Every person you meet carries experiences you'll never fully know, dreams you cannot see, struggles they rarely mention. Treat every conversation as an opportunity to leave someone feeling a little more understood than before. Because long after people forget the exact sentences you used, they will remember how safe they felt around you. And sometimes that feeling becomes the beginning of a relationship that lasts for years. Chapter 7: The Art of Asking Better Questions. Every meaningful conversation is shaped by the questions we ask, not because questions magically produce better answers, but because they reveal where our attention truly is. A person who asks thoughtful questions communicates something powerful before receiving a single response. I'm interested. I want to understand. Your perspective matters. That simple message can transform an ordinary exchange into something memorable. Many people believe communication is measured by how well they speak. Yet some of the most influential people in the world built their reputation on something far quieter. They learned how to ask better questions. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. You could ask, "What do you do?" It's a perfectly normal question. But after hearing the same question hundreds of times, most people answer almost automatically. Now imagine asking something different. What part of your work do you enjoy the most? Suddenly, the conversation changes. Instead of repeating a rehearsed response, the other person begins reflecting. Their answer becomes more personal, more authentic. The conversation gains depth. The difference wasn't the person, it was the quality of the question. Good questions invite stories. Poor questions often produce one-word answers. Think about the difference between asking, "Did you enjoy your trip?" and asking, "What was the moment you'll remember most from your trip?" The first can end with a simple yes. The second encourages someone to relive an experience. They remember emotions. They remember details. They begin sharing a part of their life instead of simply providing information. Stories create connection in ways facts rarely can. Curiosity should always feel genuine. People notice the difference almost immediately. Some questions are asked only to keep a conversation alive. Others are asked because someone sincerely wants to understand. The words may sound similar, but the intention feels completely different. When curiosity is real, people naturally become more comfortable. They sense they're not being interviewed, they're being understood, and that feeling encourages honesty. Timing also matters. Not every question belongs at the beginning of a conversation. Trust develops gradually. Just as you wouldn't hand someone your deepest thoughts within the first minute of meeting them, you shouldn't expect others to do the same. Start with what feels comfortable. As trust grows, deeper questions begin to feel natural rather than intrusive. Meaningful conversations are built layer by layer. Each answer quietly earns the next question. Another important principle is learning to listen before asking the next question. Many people become so focused on their prepared list of questions that they miss the most interesting part of the conversation. Real curiosity follows the person, not a script. Suppose someone mentions, "I've always wanted to start my own business." Instead of immediately moving to another topic, stay with that moment. Ask, what inspired that dream? Or, what's been the biggest challenge so far? The best questions often come directly from careful listening. They don't interrupt the conversation, they deepen it. Questions can also help people understand themselves. Sometimes another person already knows the answer they need. They simply haven't slowed down long enough to recognize it. A thoughtful question creates that opportunity. Instead of offering immediate advice, consider asking what feels most important to you right now. Or, if there were no fear involved, what would you choose? Questions like these don't tell someone what to think. They create space for reflection. Often that's far more valuable than giving quick solutions. There is also wisdom in knowing when not to ask a question. Silence has its own purpose. After someone shares something emotional, resist the urge to immediately fill the space. Sometimes your presence communicates more than another sentence ever could. A thoughtful pause tells the other person, "I'm still with you. I'm giving your words the attention they deserve." Not every silence needs to be repaired. Sometimes silence is part of the conversation itself. Avoid asking questions simply to prove a point. People can usually sense when a question isn't really a question. "Don't you think you're overreacting?" Why would anyone believe that? These aren't invitations to understand, they're disguised arguments. Questions should create openness, not defensiveness. The moment someone feels attacked, curiosity disappears. The conversation becomes a debate instead of a dialogue. If your goal is understanding, ask with humility, not with the intention of winning. One overlooked habit of great communicators is that they remember previous answers. If someone tells you their child recently started school, or that they were preparing for an important interview, bring it up the next time you speak. How did the interview go? How is your daughter enjoying school? Simple questions like these communicate something far deeper than curiosity. They communicate care. People rarely expect others to remember small details. When you do, they feel valued, and relationships quietly become stronger. Perhaps the greatest purpose of a question isn't collecting information, it's building understanding. Every thoughtful question says, "Help me see the world through your eyes." Very few gifts are more meaningful than that. As you continue developing your communication skills, remember this: you don't always need better answers. Sometimes you simply need better questions. Because the quality of your conversations will almost always reflect the quality of your curiosity. And curiosity, when expressed with sincerity and respect, has the power to open doors that confidence alone never could. Chapter 8: Handling Difficult Conversations with Confidence. Sooner or later, everyone faces a conversation they'd rather avoid. It might be telling someone they've disappointed you, admitting you made a mistake, giving difficult feedback, setting a boundary, or hearing words you never wanted to hear. These moments test far more than your communication skills. They test your emotional maturity. Because when emotions rise, clear thinking often becomes much harder. Our instinct is usually to protect ourselves, to defend, to interrupt, to explain, or sometimes to remain silent simply because speaking feels too uncomfortable. Yet the conversations we avoid are often the ones that shape our relationships the most. One of the biggest mistakes people make during difficult conversations is entering them with only one objective: to win. Winning an argument may satisfy your pride for a moment, but if the relationship suffers in the process, very little has actually been gained. Healthy communication isn't about defeating another person, it's about solving a problem together. The moment you stop seeing the other person as your opponent, the entire conversation changes. Instead of asking, "How do I prove I'm right?" begin asking, "How do we move forward from here?" That small change in perspective transforms conflict into cooperation. Preparation matters more than people realize. When emotions are involved, it's easy to begin speaking before you've fully organized your thoughts. As a result, conversations often wander. Important points become buried beneath frustration. Misunderstandings multiply. Before entering an important discussion, pause for a few moments. Ask yourself three simple questions. What am I really trying to communicate? What outcome do I hope for? What emotions might the other person be experiencing? These questions help you enter the conversation with intention instead of reaction. Another powerful habit is separating facts from interpretations. Imagine a coworker misses an important deadline. One response might be, "You clearly don't care about this project." Notice what's happened. The conversation has already moved from observation to assumption. A more constructive approach might be, "The report wasn't submitted by the agreed deadline, and I'd like to understand what happened." The first statement invites defensiveness. The second invites dialogue. Facts create clarity. Assumptions often create conflict. Whenever possible, begin with what you know, not with what you believe someone intended. Listening becomes even more important when emotions are involved. Ironically, this is often when people listen the least. They're busy preparing counter-arguments, waiting for an opportunity to interrupt, searching for evidence that supports their own position. But conflict rarely disappears because someone speaks louder. It begins disappearing when both people finally feel understood. This doesn't mean agreeing with everything the other person says. It means demonstrating that you've genuinely heard them. Simple responses such as, "I understand why you see it that way," or "I can understand why that upset you," do not weaken your position. They strengthen the conversation. Understanding is not surrender. It's the foundation of productive dialogue. There will also be moments when emotions become overwhelming. Perhaps the other person's voice begins rising. Perhaps your own frustration starts taking control. In those moments, remember something important. Not every conversation needs to continue immediately. Sometimes the wisest decision is to pause. A short break isn't avoidance. It's emotional regulation. Returning 10 minutes later with a calmer mind often accomplishes far more than forcing a conversation while both people are overwhelmed. Strong communicators know when to continue. Great communicators also know when to wait. One of the hardest skills to develop is accepting responsibility without collapsing into shame. If you've made a mistake, own it. Don't hide behind excuses. Don't blame circumstances. Don't immediately point to someone else's faults. A sincere apology isn't a sign of weakness. It's a demonstration of integrity. People don't expect perfection. They expect honesty. Admitting, "You're right, I should have handled that differently," often creates more respect than an hour spent defending yourself. Accountability builds trust. Defensiveness slowly destroys it. Setting boundaries is another conversation many people fear, especially those who worry about disappointing others. Saying no can feel uncomfortable, yet every time you say yes to something that violates your values, your time, or your well-being, you're quietly saying no to yourself. Healthy boundaries aren't walls designed to keep people out. They're guidelines that protect mutual respect. You can be kind while remaining firm. You can be compassionate without abandoning your own needs. Clear boundaries rarely damage healthy relationships. More often, they strengthen them because everyone understands where they stand. Another principle worth remembering is that not every conflict can be resolved immediately. Sometimes people need time. Sometimes emotions need space to settle. Sometimes agreement simply isn't possible. Your responsibility is not controlling another person's reaction. Your responsibility is controlling your own character. Speak honestly, listen carefully, remain respectful. After that, some outcomes will remain outside your control. And that's okay. Peace doesn't always come from changing another person's mind. Sometimes it comes from knowing you communicated with integrity. As you continue improving your communication, difficult conversations will not disappear. They are part of every meaningful relationship. Every family experiences them. every friendship, every workplace, every partnership. The difference is that you will begin approaching them with greater calm, greater clarity, and greater compassion. Not because conflict becomes comfortable, but because you no longer fear it. You understand that honest conversations, handled with respect, don't destroy relationships. More often than not, they deepen them. Before leaving this chapter, remember one final truth. Courage in communication isn't measured by how loudly you speak. It's measured by your willingness to remain calm when emotions invite you to lose control, to remain respectful when disagreement appears, to remain honest when hiding would feel easier. Because difficult conversations are rarely remembered for who spoke the most. They're remembered for who listened the best, who stayed composed, and who chose understanding over victory. Those are the conversations that change relationships, and sometimes they change lives. Chapter 9, The Lifelong Journey of Becoming a Better Communicator. There comes a moment when every learner asks the same question. When will I finally become a confident communicator? It's an understandable question. We naturally want to reach a point where speaking feels effortless, where difficult conversations no longer create anxiety, where every presentation goes smoothly, where every word arrives exactly when we need it. But communication doesn't work that way. There isn't a finish line where growth suddenly stops. There isn't a final level where nothing more can be learned. Like any meaningful skill, communication is a lifelong practice. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it so rewarding. Think about the greatest musicians. Even after decades of performing, they still practice. World-class athletes continue refining movements they've repeated thousands of times. Master craftsmen still search for better techniques after years of experience. Not because they've failed to master their craft, but because mastery is never a destination. It's a relationship with continuous improvement. Communication follows the same path. Every conversation teaches something. Every mistake reveals an opportunity. Every success quietly builds the foundation for the next challenge. One of the most valuable habits you can develop is reflection. Most people finish an important conversation and immediately move on with their day. But growth happens when experience meets reflection. After a meaningful discussion, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what went well? Where did I feel most confident? What could I express more clearly next time? Was I truly listening? Did I remain curious? Did I communicate what I genuinely intended to communicate? These questions aren't invitations to criticize yourself. They're invitations to learn. Small moments of honest reflection create steady improvement over time. Progress rarely arrives in dramatic leaps. More often, it appears so gradually that you almost fail to notice it. Perhaps 6 months ago, speaking in a meeting felt impossible. Today, you contribute one thoughtful idea. A year ago, difficult conversations filled you with anxiety. Now, you're able to remain calm long enough to listen before responding. Those changes may seem small, yet they represent something extraordinary. A new version of yourself quietly taking shape. Growth isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by distance traveled. Comparison can easily distract you from that journey. It's tempting to admire someone who speaks effortlessly and conclude, I'll never be that good. But you're comparing your beginning to someone else's years of practice. You rarely see the presentations they struggled through, the awkward conversations, the forgotten words, the mistakes that taught them everything they know today. Every confident communicator was once uncertain. Every articulate speaker once searched for the right words. Every great storyteller once stumbled through their first story. Your progress deserves to be measured against your own past, not someone else's present. Patience is equally important. We often underestimate what consistent practice can accomplish over time. Imagine planting a tree. You don't expect it to provide shade the following morning. Its growth is almost invisible from one day to the next. Yet, after enough seasons have passed, the difference becomes undeniable. Communication grows the same way. One thoughtful conversation, one difficult discussion handled with maturity, one presentation completed despite fear. These moments may appear insignificant on their own. Together, they reshape your confidence. There will still be days when words don't come easily, days when anxiety returns, days when you leave a conversation wishing you had expressed yourself differently. Don't mistake those moments for failure. They are reminders that growth is never perfectly linear. Some days feel effortless, others feel challenging. Both belong to the same journey. The goal isn't eliminating every uncomfortable experience. The goal is becoming someone who continues moving forward despite them. As your communication improves, something unexpected begins to happen. The changes extend far beyond conversation. You become a better listener, a more thoughtful leader, a more supportive friend, a calmer partner, a more patient parent, a more trusted colleague. Communication influences nearly every relationship in your life. When it improves, many other areas improve alongside it. Because communication is never only about words, it's about understanding people, including yourself. Perhaps the greatest transformation isn't becoming more persuasive, or more articulate, or more confident. Perhaps it's becoming more present. Instead of worrying about saying the perfect thing, you begin paying full attention to the human being in front of you. Instead of chasing approval, you pursue understanding. Instead of protecting your image, you express your authentic self with honesty and kindness. That shift changes every conversation, not because your vocabulary suddenly becomes extraordinary, but because your presence does. As we come to the end of this journey, remember one simple truth. Your voice matters. Not because it's louder than anyone else's, not because it's flawless, but because no one else in the world has lived your experiences, learned your lessons, or carries your perspective. Someone, somewhere, may need exactly the encouragement you can offer, exactly the idea you've been afraid to share, exactly the story you've convinced yourself wasn't important. Don't let fear become the editor of your life. Speak with humility, listen with curiosity, learn with patience, and continue growing one conversation at a time. Because becoming a better communicator isn't really about speaking more. It's about connecting more deeply with others and with yourself. That journey never truly ends. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of all. Conclusion. Communication is one of the few skills that touches every part of life. It shapes our relationships, our careers, our opportunities, and even the way we understand ourselves. Every chapter of this journey has pointed toward the same idea. Confidence is not something you're born with. It's something you build through awareness, through practice, through courage. There will always be another conversation waiting for you, another opportunity to listen more carefully, to speak more clearly, to understand more deeply. Don't wait until you feel fearless. Begin with the voice you have today. Because every meaningful communicator started exactly where you are now, with uncertainty, curiosity, and the decision to keep improving. One conversation at a time, one word at a time, one connection at a time. And if you continue walking that path, you'll discover something remarkable. The greatest change won't be that other people hear you more clearly. It will be that, for the first time, you truly hear yourself. Conclusion. Your voice has always been there. As we reach the end of this journey, take a moment to look back, not just at the ideas we've explored, but at the person who first pressed play. Perhaps you arrived hoping to become more confident. Perhaps you wanted to stop overthinking every conversation. Maybe you simply wished that the words inside your mind would finally come out the way you intended. Whatever brought you here, I hope you've discovered something far more important than a collection of communication techniques. Because this journey has never been only about speaking. It's been about understanding yourself. Throughout these chapters, you've seen that confidence isn't something a lucky few are born with. It isn't hidden inside a perfect vocabulary. It isn't reserved for people with louder voices or stronger personalities. Confidence is built quietly, patiently, conversation after conversation, choice after choice, day after day. You learn that your brain isn't your enemy. It's simply trying to protect you. You learn that your inner critic doesn't have to control your future. You learned that your body speaks before your words ever do. You discovered that listening can be more powerful than talking. That asking thoughtful questions often creates deeper relationships than giving perfect answers. That difficult conversations don't have to destroy trust, they can strengthen it. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that communication isn't about performing. It's about connecting. Every meaningful relationship in your life is shaped by thousands of conversations. Some will last only a few minutes. Others will stay with you forever. You won't remember every word, neither will the people you speak with, but they will remember how you made them feel, whether they felt heard, respected, understood, safe enough to be themselves. That is the true power of communication. Not controlling people, not impressing them, but helping them feel seen. As you move forward from this moment, don't place unnecessary pressure on yourself. You don't need to become the most charismatic person in every room. You don't need to deliver flawless speeches. You don't need to eliminate every moment of nervousness. You simply need to keep practicing. One conversation, one meeting, one difficult discussion, one honest moment at a time. There will still be days when anxiety returns, days when you forget the perfect word, days when you replay conversations in your mind. That's okay. Growth has never been a straight line. Progress isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by your willingness to keep showing up. Every time you choose courage instead of silence, every time you listen before judging, every time you speak with kindness instead of fear, you become a better communicator. But something even more important happens. You become a better human being. Because communication is, and always has been, about relationships. Relationships with your family, your friends, your colleagues, your community. And perhaps the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. So when you leave this audiobook, don't leave these ideas behind. Carry them into your next conversation, your next opportunity, your next challenge. Someone out there is waiting to hear your perspective. Someone may need your encouragement, your honesty, your compassion, or simply your willingness to listen. Never underestimate what a single conversation can change. A friendship can begin with one question. A career can change because of one presentation. A misunderstanding can disappear because one person chose to listen. A life, including your own, can move in a completely different direction because someone finally found the courage to speak. So trust your voice, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. No one else has lived your story. No one else sees the world exactly the way you do. And that makes your voice valuable. Keep learning, keep listening, keep speaking, keep growing, because the journey toward becoming an exceptional communicator never truly ends. And that's what makes it so meaningful. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope these ideas stay with you long after this audiobook ends. Until next time, take care of yourself and never stop finding the courage to let your voice be heard. The end.